There you are. Come and sit for a moment. The forest is quiet tonight. Not silent, but settled, as though everything has agreed to remain where it is. You don't need to listen too closely. Whispergrove never demands attention. It notices you whether your thoughts stay or wander somewhere slower. The water is calm this evening, too calm perhaps, holding its surface without question, as if it has learned to keep secrets gently. Tonight, I want to tell you about something that rested beneath that surface, not hidden, not forgotten, simply waiting in a way that only very old places know how to do. This is a story about stillness that lasts too long, about light that learned to endure instead of change, and about what happens when something beneath the water realizes it is finally being seen. So take a breath, let the fire burn as it will. We will not be searching tonight. We will be listening. I have lived in Whispergrove long enough to know the shape of an ordinary evening. Those are the walks I value most. Not the nights when the forest shifts or calls attention to itself, but the ones that pass without announcement, when the paths remember my feet and the trees offer nothing more than their familiar company. That evening was meant to be one of those. The air was cool and settled, carrying the damp scent of moss and old leaves. Light lingered low between the trunks, stretched thin by the coming night, and the forest moved around me with the quiet confidence of something that knows itself well. I walked without hurry, my staff tapping softly against the earth, marking a rhythm the ground seemed content to follow. Nothing felt misplaced. Birdsong faded naturally as dusk deepened. Insects took their place, filling the spaces between sounds rather than competing for them. The forest breathed evenly, untroubled by memory or anticipation. I followed a familiar path southward, one I had taken many times before, toward the shallow basin where rainwater gathers after long storms. I rarely stopped there. It was an unremarkable place, still reflective, patient, the kind of water that exists only to hold the sky for a while before giving it back. I was already passing it when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a break in the reflection, a patch where the water failed to mirror the darkening canopy above. I slowed my steps, more out of habit than concern, and turned my head slightly toward the basin. The water was too still, not calm, still. It held no image of the branches overhead, no trace of the dimming sky. The surface lay flat and unbroken, as though it had forgotten what it was meant to reflect. Even the thin mist hovering above it seemed unsure whether to drift onward or remain. I stopped several paces from the shore. Water that does not move is not always dangerous, but it is always attentive. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb the damp earth near the edge. The forest behind me continued as it had before, leaves shifting, distant movement among roots, unconcerned with whatever had claimed my attention. That was when I saw it, a faint glimmer beneath the surface, so slight I might have missed it had I not already been watching. It appeared briefly, then faded, leaving the water unchanged. I waited, unsure whether the moment belonged to the basin or to my own tired eyes. Then it returned, a pale, steady light, far below the surface, pulsing gently, as though keeping time with something older than the forest itself. I did not approach. Some things reveal more when you allow them to think you are not watching. I lowered myself to one knee at the edge of the basin and rested my hand against the damp soil. The ground was cool but not cold. Beneath it, I felt nothing unusual. No shifting roots, no hidden current. And yet, the light remained. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to disturb the surface. Beneath the water, far deeper than the basin should allow, shapes began to form. Lines first, faint and uncertain, then angles, then depth. What I saw did not rise toward me. It waited, as though it had always been there, and I had simply learned how to notice. Buildings, streets, windows, set close together, glowing softly from within. A city rested beneath the water. Not a ruin, not a remnant. A city, intact and patient, its lights burning steadily as though night had never reached it. I did not speak. Some discoveries prefer silence at first. I watched as the glow shifted gently, moving from one structure to the next, not randomly, but with intention. The city was awake, or perhaps it had never slept. There were no currents, no bubbles rose to the surface, no signs that anything below required breath or movement. The water above the city remained undisturbed, holding its shape like glass. I realized then what unsettled me most. The city was not submerged, it was sealed. I stayed by the basin for a long time, allowing the sight to settle into understanding. Whispergrove has taught me that amazement is not a reaction. It is a process, one that unfolds slowly, layer by layer, until surprise gives way to recognition. This place had been here long before I noticed it. Perhaps long before I arrived in Whispergrove at all. I returned the following night, and the night after that. Each time, the city remained unchanged. The lights neither brightened nor dimmed, but they responded to my presence in subtle ways. When I stood closer, they pulsed slightly faster. When I stepped back, they slowed, as though listening rather than reacting. On the fourth night, I brought my lantern. Its light was old, warm, fed by oil I had carried through more seasons than I could remember. I held it low, close to the water's surface, careful not to let its glow scatter too widely. The city responded immediately. Lights flared gently below, shifting from their steady rhythm into something more curious, more aware. The water trembled, not enough to ripple, but enough to acknowledge the change. I understood then that the city did not see. It perceived. Light, to it, was not illumination. It was language. I sat at the edge of the basin and held the lantern steady. I did not move it closer, nor did I withdraw it. Instead, I waited, allowing the city to adjust to my presence at its own pace. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. The mist thickened around me, blurring the boundary between forest and water. The city's glow grew clearer, its shapes more defined. I could see arches now, and bridges, and tall structures that reached upward but never touched the surface. Still, nothing moved. I realized then that the city was not trapped by water. It was choosing not to rise. The thought settled uneasily. Some places sink because they fall. Others sink because they are asked to stay. I lowered my lantern until its reflection touched the surface of the basin. The water accepted the light without distortion, holding it carefully, as though afraid of breaking it. Beneath, the city brightened. Windows glowed in sequence, spreading outward from the point where my lantern hovered, like a greeting traveling through stone and space alike. I felt a faint pressure against my chest, not physical but present, the sensation of being noticed by something vast and attentive. "I see you," I said quietly. The words did not echo. They did not sink. But the light below shifted again, responding not to the sound, but to the intent behind it. That was when I noticed the boundary. A thin line barely visible separating the city from the water above it. It shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone, yet it held firm, unmoving. The water did not pass through it, nor did the city's light. The city was enclosed in darkness, shaped like water. A realization formed, slow and heavy. This place had not been flooded. It had been hidden. I stayed with the basin until the forest began to stir toward morning. When I finally stood, the city's lights dimmed slightly, not in disappointment, but in acknowledgement. I nodded once, a habit I have learned matters more than words in Whispergrove, and turned back toward home. Sleep came lightly that night. Dreams drifted around the basin, around streets that curved in impossible ways, around doors that opened inward, but never outward. I woke before dawn with the sense that something was waiting, not urgently, not desperately, but with the quiet certainty of something that had learned patience too well. By the next evening, I understood the problem. The city was sustained by light, but the light it had was not enough. Its rhythm was steady, practiced, preserved, but it lacked growth. It endured rather than lived. Whatever people once walked its streets had chosen preservation over change, sealing themselves away from time itself. And time, when denied, does not disappear. It accumulates. I returned to the basin once more, lantern in hand, and this time I did not sit. I stood at the water's edge and listened. The city pulsed faintly below, waiting, not to be discovered, but to be answered. I stood by the basin longer than I had intended. The city's light continued its slow rhythm beneath the surface, steady but restrained, like a breath held not out of fear, but discipline. It did not call to me. It did not demand anything. It simply remained, patient in the way only very old things can afford to be. Whispergrove has taught me that problems rarely announce themselves as such. They arrive disguised as balance, as something that works well enough to avoid intervention. And yet, balance maintained for too long without change becomes another kind of imbalance. The city endured. That was the trouble. I knelt at the water's edge and lowered my palm just above the surface, close enough to feel the cool presence rising from it. The boundary shimmered faintly where water met the unseen veil that held the city apart from the world above. Darkness, shaped like water. Light, contained like memory. I had seen such boundaries before, though never in this form. Whispergrove is full of places that exist between intentions, hollows where sound behaves strangely, clearings that remember footsteps long after paths have vanished. This was one of those places, only deeper, more deliberate. The city had been preserved, not saved, and preservation, I have learned, is a kind of stillness that resists the future. I lifted my lantern and held it steady, watching how the light beneath responded. The city brightened slightly, then settled again, adjusting itself as though careful not to overreach. It did not want more light. It wanted different light. That understanding came quietly, without certainty at first. I remained there, breathing slowly, allowing the forest to speak around the thought rather than through it. The trees did not stir. The basin did not ripple. Everything waited, as if the answer required stillness to surface. Light is not only brightness, it is direction, it is change. The city's light had been cycling inward for a very long time. I realized then that the boundary was not keeping the water out, it was keeping the city in. The people who built it, whoever they had been, had chosen to step away from the surface world, sealing themselves beneath a veil of water-shaped darkness to escape something they no longer wished to face. Time, perhaps, or consequence. They had succeeded, but success, held too tightly, becomes another form of loss. I rose slowly and stepped back from the basin. The city's glow dimmed slightly, uncertain, not alarmed. I set my lantern on the ground behind me and turned my gaze toward the forest itself. Whispergrove was watching, not with judgment, with attention. I walked a short distance into the trees, collecting what light the forest was willing to give. Fireflies gathered readily, drawn not by motion but by patience. Pale mushrooms glowed faintly at the base of old trunks, their light subtle, steady, unassuming. I did not take them. I did not disturb their places. Instead, I remembered. Light in Whispergrove is shared, not gathered. I returned to the basin and stood between the lantern and the water. Slowly, deliberately, I adjusted the lantern's hood, widening the spread of its glow until it no longer pointed downward alone, but outward across the surface. The water accepted it. The boundary did not. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, very gently, the city's rhythm shifted. Its lights began to respond not to brightness, but to variation. Where my lantern flickered slightly in the evening air, the city answered with subtle changes of its own. Windows brightened and dimmed unevenly now, not in a practiced cycle, but with curiosity. I felt it then, the smallest tremor beneath my feet. Not movement, release. The boundary shimmered more visibly, thinning in places, thickening in others, as though uncertain which shape it was meant to hold. The water above remained still, but its reflection changed, no longer empty, no longer absent. It began to remember the sky. I took a step closer. The city's lights rose slightly, not toward the surface, but toward the idea of it. Structures that had once seemed distant grew clearer, their forms more defined. I could see now that many buildings bore marks of waiting. Doors worn smooth by hands that no longer touched them, bridges reinforced again and again rather than replaced. This city had been maintained by repetition. What it needed was interruption. I lifted the lantern and raised it higher, allowing its light to scatter across the basin rather than concentrate in one place. The fireflies drifted closer, their glow mingling with the lantern's warmth. Reflections danced now where none had been before. The boundary wavered, and then, without sound, it lowered, not breaking, not tearing, simply sinking, as though acknowledging that it no longer needed to hold its shape so rigidly. Water flowed where darkness had been, but the city did not drown. Instead, the water passed through it gently, like air through leaves. Streets remained intact. Lights continued to burn, brighter now, freer in their rhythm. The city did not rise. The world around it fell. The basin deepened, expanding outward in slow, careful measure. Water drawn from unseen places fed the change, spreading into the forest floor. Roots drank deeply. Moss darkened. The ground softened underfoot. Whispergrove shifted, not in protest, in response. I felt the cost immediately. The southern paths grew heavier, their soil saturated beyond comfort. Some of the older trees leaned subtly, adjusting to new balances beneath their roots. The forest was not harmed, but it was changed, asked to carry weight it had not carried before. The city glowed more brightly now, no longer hidden, no longer sealed. Its light reflected upward through the water, casting faint patterns across the trunks of nearby trees. For the first time, the basin felt alive, not with movement, but with exchange. I understood then. The city could exist, but only if Whispergrove agreed to hold it. I remained at the basin until night settled fully, until the forest found its new rhythm. The city's lights stabilized, no longer tentative, no longer restrained. Whatever had once lived there, whether still present or long transformed, rested easier now, allowed to change again. When I finally extinguished my lantern, the city did not dim. It no longer depended on borrowed light alone. I turned away slowly, feeling the altered ground beneath my feet, listening to the way water moved differently through the roots. Whispergrove did not resist the change, but it remembered it. Some solutions do not remove a problem, they redistribute it. That night, the forest did not rest as deeply as it once had. Water murmured softly where silence had been before. The air carried a heavier scent, rich and damp. Balance had been restored, but not without effort. I paused once more at the edge of the basin and placed my hand against the earth. "Stay," I said quietly, "but do not forget how to move." The city's light pulsed once beneath the surface, steady and present. Then I walked home. Whispergrove followed, step by careful step, adjusting itself around the choice that had been made. Some places are not meant to be saved. They are meant to be carried. And some paths do not lead forward or downward at all, but inward, toward a balance that must be chosen again and again. And so the water settled again. The surface grew smooth and patient, holding its reflection without asking what lay beneath. The lights below found their rhythm, no longer restrained, no longer pressing upward. The forest adjusted in its quiet way. Roots drank more deeply. The ground softened where it was needed. Nothing protested. Nothing hurried to return to how it had been. That is the way of Whispergrove. What is changed is not undone. It is carried. Some places are not meant to rise into the light. Others are not meant to disappear beneath it. They endure together, each holding part of the weight. If your thoughts feel heavy tonight, you may leave them here for a while. The water does not mind. It has learned how to hold cities and all the silence that comes with them. Stay by the fire as long as you wish, or drift into rest knowing that beneath still waters there are places that remember being seen. Good night, my friend.